understanding. Thank you very much. Understanding, Yitro, the convert, or Yitro, the Noahide. Rabbi Avner, I'm sure, can throw into the mix some interesting concepts. Just a slight background is Yitro, we understand, was actually an advisor as well as Yov to Paro. And it's interesting, when you first read the portion, especially as a person that we come from where we come from and not knowing all the midrash, etc., you just assume that Yitro was a guy hanging out in the desert somewhere, and Moses happened to come tumbling across him when he's parched in the desert and finds this poor old shepherd man. And it's just much more grander than that. It appears that maybe even Moses went out to that part of the desert at the time that he went for that very purpose, is to meet up with Yitro and his family. Yitro obviously was supposedly the priest of all priests, sort of like the Pope of paganism. But then yet there's some idea that he had some understanding of God and then further developed himself into his full knowledge while Moses was at Yithro's home. And there he worked for Yitro and ended up having his daughter's hand in marriage. The question I think that one person asked a long time ago is, well, Moses, how and why would he marry a pagan's daughter? And it's clear that obviously she wasn't a pagan by the time they were married. She had understood the interworkings of the one true creator of the universe. Yitro is the book of Yitro. We're going to cover just a little bit of the context of it, and then we're going to get right into the questions. See if I missed anything in the summation. Of course, we understand that this is, besides Job, this is the only book that is dedicated in the name of a non-Israelite. So it's very, very interesting section that it is at that Mount Sinai that Yitro shows up. He is absolutely dumbfounded at the show of strength and power and authority that God had over Paro, and he declared that this God that you serve, or this God that you have, is the God of all gods. There's nothing other than him. It says on the 6th day of Sivan, the 7 weeks after Exodus, the entire nation actually had assembled at Mount Sinai. This was a period of 3 days before the giving of Torah, the Matan Torah, and God decides or descends up on the mountain. It's the thunder, lightning, billowing smoke, and blast of the shofar. God proclaims the 10 Commandments, commanded the people of Israel to believe in God and not worship idols, of course, and not to take his name, make his name common, keeping the Sabbath and honoring parents, and not to murder, not to commit adultery, not to steal, not to bear false witness or covet another's property. Each one of these things within the 10 Commandments can be expounded infinitum. I actually took a class some months back with a rabbi studying this very text and seeing the depth in which these ideas flow of, for example, murdering and coveting, and exactly what is idol worship and exactly what is taking and making God's name common. It was a very profound study in itself. So this here, as a matter of fact, later on, too bad that Ross isn't here with us. He could expound the historicity of Yithro's family and descendants that ended up following the Israelites out and end up settling in the land of Israel. We see throughout Israel's history, these people have had their interaction with even the very throne of Israel, so the king of Israel. So that I'm going to conclude on that sort of short introduction, and let's get into the text. Does anybody have a question, or where would you like to start on the text? Steve, you're bubbling up here, killing me.
I want to start out with an easy question.
Doesn't mean I can answer it, but go ahead.
Well, that's true. The question is, when did Jethro actually meet with Moses to discuss the laws and the judicial system? Because if you follow the context of the rabbis, the first 6 days of Sivan leading up to Mount Sinai, Moses was busy doing other things.
Right.
When does he actually meet Jethro?
So you're talking about the meeting with Yitro where he understood the current or the new laws that were given at Mount Sinai. Is that what you're saying?
Chronology is on Sivan, the first day, the children encamped at Mount Sinai and Moses left them sleep in. Second day, Moses ascended the mountain and brings back the message from God that he wanted to dedicate these people to be his chosen. The third day identifies the fact that God instructs Moses to fence off the mountain. The fourth day tells us that the people were to sanctify themselves and suspend marital relationships and all of the things necessary to become purified. The fifth day, Moses builds an altar and seals the covenant. Now here it said that all the God commands we shall do. Then on the sixth day, he goes up to receive the commandments. Now, at what point then does Moses and Jethro actually meet? Because obviously the chronology doesn't work the way it is. And obviously God had a purpose in putting this section first.
Okay, first of all, I agree with you. The chronology of this is absolutely mind-bending because, it talks about in chapter 18 where it says he ends with the departure of Yitro, right? And then later on we find out, well, Yitro's still here. Like what's going on in the chronology? I would prefer to bat it over to Rabbi Avner. We've had these discussions on many different occasions. For me, not to my satisfaction as to the chronology and what happened, because I've got a list of things that I put up here the other day that there was all one lines check.
According to Rashi, which follow the Midrash, Rashi says at the beginning of the Parsha that actually it says on the next day, tomorrow, the following day, Yitro told Moses about this judiciary system. So Rashi says next day after Yom Kippur, which is much after the giving of Torah. This is second year when he came down from the mountain after with the second luchot, second tablet, and he came down on Yom Kippur and he said, God forgave you. And at that point, he met Yitro, according to Rashi. Other Ramban says no, we should read it as chronologically here. And Yitro came before Matan Torah, not necessarily the same week. We don't know exactly when, but before Matan Torah. Why it's important? What's the deal here? It's an enormous difference, because the question is, he saw Moses sitting and judging. What kind of system of judgment Moses did before Matan Torah?
Right.
If you say that it came after Matan Torah, so I understand Moses was sitting and judging according to the Torah law. But if you say that Yitro met Moses before Matan Torah, So Moses used other system, not the Torah, but his own mind, which he sat like a king, and the Midrash says it like a king, and he judged according to his own mind without any connection to the Torah, which means, if you look also at the system, the judiciary system that Yitro offer here is a military, like a officer of 1,000, officer of 100, officer of 10. This is hierarchy of a military. Whereas the Torah law doesn't work like this. We have a court of 3, court of 5, court of 7, but nothing in this hierarchy of like military. The subject is enormously important, which means that there were two systems in Israel, up to after King Solomon and down to the destruction of the first temple. All these years that they were king in Israel, they had two systems. King Solomon was set on his own throne, and he judged from his own mind, like the famous trial of the two women. The Sanhedrin actually sat in a different building. And so they have a secular versus Torah. And Rabbi Kook, actually, the chief rabbi of Israel, used that metaphor to say that today, when he was asked, what will happen when the state of Israel will be set up? And this was before, like at the beginning of the century, like 1930. So he said, well, this is a precedent that Israel will have two systems, should have a rabbinical court and a Knesset court. So the Knesset in Israel today is completely secular, and they didn't follow the Rabbi Kook advice to have also like a second house, like a Senate that will work by Torah law and will give a stamp, of course, a stamp on the Knesset law. So the role of this rabbinical super senate, what you call it, or super institute, rabbinical one, the function will be just to make sure they don't clash with the Torah. And also there are certain fields that only Torah will not. So this is the section here is extremely important when you come to this question, what kind of judiciary system Israel would have. And interesting, there was a separation between secular and Torah, even in Moses. Even if you take this explanation as valid, it means that even Moses had the two system of hierarchy of the military one that decided what you do, how much tax you raise, how much speed you run on the highway, how much tax you take, how much, all kind of civil law, mamonot, usually monetary things, and rabbinical court to deal with rabbinical aspect, so Torah aspect, so enormously important section. It's interesting that all came from Yitro, who was a non-Jew. So here is another argument come from here, that when you come to secular law, I can copy United States law and bring it to Israel. I say, oh, this nation had a wonderful law. It's not the Torah law, but it's wonderful secular law. I can adapt it to Israel. because because this Yitro, Moses adopted Yitro advice and system. And by the way, I don't want to take too much time. That's the notion between the question is, when did he come? Did he come before Torah or after Torah? Each answer will give you a whole different universe.
Okay, so to go back to the to the question is also something that we should look at, because this is a sort of a debated view on when this happened, and we all understand the nuances of the verses. Half of the Parashat seems that it occurred at the point of the pre-Matan Torah, and the second section, the Judges and Yitro service, is chapter 13 through 17 has occurred at the post-Matan Torah. But it seems that the Ebenezer says, and he thinks that it's all post giving of Torah. Rashi thinks that there is a sort of a split in the Parsha. There's some distance of time between the two sections of the Parsha, first part before and the second part after Matan Torah. The actual sort of question you asked, Steve, and it's a really important question: why did they choose to do it this way? And so much of the Parsha, we have described a sort of a complex clash of opinion amongst prominent Rishonim. But where does this lead us? First, we've got to actually come to the assumption or the opinion that there is less emphasis on the approach to Rambam's idea. And after all, for him, this is the sort of appropriate historical placing of the text, since Torah saw it fit to relate them to us this way, sort of in a natural place to write them down. But for Rashi and more of the Ebenezer, we must have a good explanation as to why these stories do not belong here historically accurate. There's a purpose behind it. And why are these stories written here of all places? Why did they have to put them here? Rashi, and more than Ebenezer, we must have a good explanation as to why these stories, which do not have any historicity, historically accurate time frames, Yitro's story is set in sort of a very human parsha. One's observance might set our minds working here. The first half of the parsha is the story of Yitro's arrival, is a very human parsha. Yitro's revelation, he hears, he has dinner with Moshe. Actually, Moshe goes out and greets him, shows him such high level of respect. There's a very serious human story happening here. And the parsha is replete with Yitro's expression of humanity and the need to make sure that information is disseminated properly, and that Moses is not overworked or overtaxed. There's a very human connection in the story, this apparent father-in-law and son-in-law relationship that is a very real relationship. In the second section, it has a simplicity as well. It really is a product straight out of common sense and intuition and management skills. It's just anybody probably could have advised Moses to do the same thing. Steve, if we had sat there and watched that, we probably said, Moses, look, this is not the way you task out. Steve would probably go, look, I was a school administrator, and understand you cannot teach every child independently. You have to have people that are set up to do this. It's a normal human thing. I'm not sure that there's a real mystery as to why it's put here. Maybe you have an idea, Steve.
No, the question comes to my mind because having gone to Israel, I understand the Sanhedrin. Right. I understand the fact that there were 3 judges and there were situations of 7 judges. Right. I understand that. Then I look at Jethro's system, which according to the rabbi, and I appreciate that. I appreciate the fact that he called it a military system, because that's exactly what it is.
Right.
And I just find, when does Moses all of a sudden establish the Sanhedrin and what appears to be a second way of judging? And I appreciated the fact that the rabbi brought up the fact that we're talking about religious Torah versus human squabble. And that's what, so I'm assuming that what Moses had been doing prior to Jethro's coming was squabble, dealing with
settling what do you call civil dispute.
Correct. And then, so I was wondering, how does when did this, was the first system, the Torah system, established at this point in time, or is it established later? Because I know he drags in 70 elders, so we get the concept of the Sanhedrin and all of that. I just wondered if there was a backflow, or how he went from 70 down to 3 and all of those other. You understand what I'm trying to say? That we with Jethro's system, I can understand it as a squabble system. I also understand Torah was very important, but they just received the Torah. So Torah really didn't have a lot of, I don't think they were dealing with a lot of religious problems in the very beginning. I think the religious problems came along as they began to develop their laws. Then they began to look at the other. So I appreciate the rabbi's answers, and I appreciate your answer. It just confounds my mind how the two systems got started. One, I know, Moses' system with Jethro. The second system, the Torah system, that was the one that throws me for a loop.
Okay, so what really hit me in the head while you were talking there was, these are two different systems for two different matters. I mean, just like our court system we have in America, there is a criminal court system and then there is a civil court system, and the procedures are different and how things are handled, from the judiciary to the prosecution. The rules are so different. And I really think that I'm seeing this for the first time, that what Yitro is talking about is dealing with a civil system, how to mitigate civil issues within the tribe. Later on, Matan Torah and afterward, there had to be a way to teach the Torah and to mitigate Torah law. Totally two different systems. Does that make sense? Now, it's like I see it now. It's like, oh, well, we're talking about two different systems, in which later on down the road, in a postmodern era, Israel has two systems.
Well, and that also brings, let me try to reframe myself. I got three things going on in my head at the same time, which is usual. I'm arguing twice.
That's small compared to what's normally going through my head.
Okay. As I'm looking at this, at what's going on, when Moses comes down from the mountain the second time, if I'm understanding correctly, that's when Jethro really arrives, if I'm doing it chronologically. But anyway, that's just my personal opinion. He arrives down the mountain to find him dealing with civil matters. In other words, they came to the mountain as one. The golden calf happens, and now they find themselves back in the same position they were before. And what we're now seeing today is a divided system of I. They were at the mountain together as I, as one. Now they're individuals, I. And now we're seeing this system having to be implemented to deal with. So I'm really looking at the system of civil court at this particular point in time. That's what's really happening.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I'll tell you, we've never elucidated that concept in any of our parshas ever. Have we broken that down into that level? Tar, you had something, you have your hand up.
I don't know if I'm seeing this right, but it's necessary to have both systems going on at the same time. The need for both systems is simultaneously. So it's hard to put one in front of the other, you know, which one happened first because this is more important or this is whatever. So they were both needed. And so maybe they put it in this way so that, you know, we wouldn't say, oh, okay, well, the Torah system is more important than the civil system or whatever. The fact is they're both needed simultaneously. So he throws them both together in the mix master at the same time. And I don't know if I'm making sense or not.
No, you're making sense. The question that I would have to maybe Rabbi Avner here is in a proper world, or in a world in which everything operates according to the highest level of divine consciousness, would we need this civil system instead with the operation that every person lives according to these Torah standards?
Let me inject here, and I'd like to answer first Steve's question about what point the Torah system was set up. Let's not forget about the oral Torah. In addition to the written Torah, Moses had an oral Torah, which is not written in the book at all. So you ask when, at what point the system of 5, 3, 5, 7, and 17 was set up. Obviously, it was set up by Moses orally. Tradition said that the same moment he came down from the mountain on Yom Kippur, that's the beginning of the oral Torah also. And I want to mention something else here about, you mentioned, talking about the civil disputes. Moses says there in the book of Numbers that Yitro asked him to join them. So you will be our eyes. So one simple explanation, oh, you know the way, the desert. But Moses didn't need a scout. He had a cloud that he walked after the cloud. So the explanation is you will be our eyes in civil matter, in wisdom. So that's another proof that Yitro added to Judaism or to Moses a lot of wisdom, and that's what the function of Noachide. By the way, everything about Yitro is 7. He had 7 names. He had 7 daughters. By the way, all the names, different names, but all express that he is a friend of God. Reuel, Chovav, he loves God, afraid of God, friend of God. So he had 7 names. He had 7 daughters. One of Zipporah married to Moses, and another daughter married the son of Aaron. And he had 7 camps. When he joined Israel in the desert, they constituted 6 camps. He presented the 7 camp that surround the camp of Israel. So 7 camp is not 7 camp, and 7 commandment. And here the section that we talk with Moses about the judiciary system, the name Elohim, the judge, repeats 7 times. So everything about Moses, about Yitro, is 7, and so that's it. And we can talk about it a lot, about the meaning of that. But obviously, 7 commandments surrounding the camp of Israel. At the time of Yitro, it was only 1. But in the future, the camp, this 7 camp surrounding Israel will be a huge. Whole humanity should be that 7 camp that surround the central camp of Israel. By the way, what brought him to Moses? Do you know what brought him? Why did he come?
He came. My assumption is he came to bring his Moses' wife and sons.
No, he says, the Parashat says, and Yitro heard what Elohim said, Elohim did to Moses, and then that Hashem, Yud-Heh-Vav-Keh, took Israel out from Egypt. And Rashi says, he heard the Kriyat Yamsuf. He heard about the Egyptian being drowned in the water. And then he says, in Pasuk in verse 11, he says, I know that Elohim, what Elohim did, but davar asher azidu alem, he punished the Egyptian by the same sin that they committed.
Right.
They thrown, Rashi here says, they threw the children of Israel to the Nile. How many children died? Who knows? Hundreds of thousands. And now, when he heard that, wow, Hashem now punished Egypt, Hashem could have punished the Egyptian by any way, but he selected the water to punish the Egyptian as a measure for measure, midat adin. So here is midat adin, and there is a question here. If Rambam raised the question, if Yitro Yud-Heh-Vav-Keh or just Elohim, just midat adin. He says, you can say that he didn't know Yud-Heh-Vav-Keh, but that's very hard to accept because he knew Moses first for so many years. I cannot believe that he didn't know about Yud-Heh-Vav-Keh. But what impressed him was the measure for measure.
Right.
And for him, it was like, wow, here I see the hand of God punishing, executing the punishment. And that brought him into that, seeing the evil people get the punishment by the same sin that they committed.
Right.
This was very impressive for him.
Sandy, you had something you wanted to throw in.
When Rabbi mentioned the 7 names of Jethro, Rabbi Wolbe's podcast this week on this portion deals with those 7 names, and he brought up an interesting point that there are 7 names for the Yetzer-Hara. And he tied each one of Jethro's names to one of the names of the Yetzer-Hara, how they were connected, and then he brought it down how Jethro overcame each one of those evil inclinations to become the person he is. And I thought that was
really
very
good
interesting to connect those 7s together.
Yeah, that's really good. Steve?
Rabbi brought another one up to my mind. I've always wondered, there's an acronym that goes for the first 7 parshas. The acronym is Shevovim, which means irresponsible. After the Mishpatim finally arrives and Moses goes through all these extra laws and all of those other things, are we saying at that point in time, Israel then became responsible for what its actions were? Just as up until that time, they were children, and now all of a sudden they've become adults? Is that I've seen the word Shavavim, but I've never seen anybody try to tell me how it applies. That's, I guess, my question.
You ask me, you can say that they were until they came to Sinai, they were Noachai. They were the same status as any other nation at that point. Shovevim, the word Shovevim, I didn't really much to describe him as Shovevim. I don't know if that's the right approach, They were simple slave. They worship idols in like the Egyptian, and they slowly. It took them a while to accept the Torah and to digest it and to believe in God. We see later on that only 40 days after accepting the Torah, they worship the golden calf.
Right.
So so they came out from Egypt, but Egypt didn't come out from their heart. They were still carrying all the paganism and the idea from Egypt, and also it's an important issue here to believe in God or to know God. I don't want to go into that right now, but it's an enormous issue because as long as they say believe, I believe in something, there is a room there, an issue for doubt. I believe there is a table there in the next room. I'm not so sure. I believe in God, but I'm not so sure. I just believe. To know God, I know there is a table there. I know because I saw it, I touched it. It's an enormous difference. And when you come to the first commandment, I am God, we discuss idolatry at length in our classes, all the different, there are so many types of idolatry and so on. We spent so much time in our class on Monday about different types of idolatry and so on. But when he says, I am, the commandment number 1, what is it? There is a debate among them first. Is it a command to know God, to know for real, or to know his name? That's a different issue. Do I need to know that he exists? Which probably nobody will ever know that he exists. It's not a table that I can touch. To know, but it actually means to know the God's name. And the name of Yitro-Rod, the name that he appeared there in number 1. He presents himself in a certain way, in a certain name. You should know the name. That's the commandment number 1. The Rambam actually used these 2 terms. In Sefer HaMitzvot, in the book of commandment, when he lists the commandment, he says it's a mitzvah to believe. And when he talk about when he read the Mishnah Torah, the code, the code of the Torah, he write, it's a mitzvah to know. So now there is a huge literature about the difference, analyzing what's the difference between the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvot and the Rambam in Mishnah Torah when he says to know. And so Israel actually, even though if you take this path, you understand, although they believe in God when they saw him they believe in God when they saw him, the miracle and split of the sea, the saying, hallelujah, fine, beautiful. 2 days later, they forgot about him. So they saw God, they heard God on Mount Sinai, wow, they believe in him. They could know him because they heard such voices. No, 40 days later, it didn't hold any water. The face said, start worshiping the idols, the golden calf. So belief is a weakness there. And Israel has to climb up until today, forever. If humanity has to climb up from this level from sheer belief to know. I think we are at the stage now that we need to teach people to know God, to know the name.
Right.
Have you ever heard about why it's not Jehovah? It's Yitro-Rod. You know what it means? It means a merciful attribute. Have you ever heard about it? Well, this is commandment number 1. You should know. Have you heard about Elohim? No, I heard about God. But did you hear about the judge? Did you know why the universe was created? To stand judgment? Have you heard about it? So our job is now to teach humanity how to know God.
Right.
In a sense, Rambam says to know Him and to understand the name. That's the key to the Torah. If you don't distinguish, you don't know what Elohim is, YHVH, you miss the entire Torah. The whole every page I turn, I see the clash between attributes. I mean, the story. If you don't pay attention, like here in Yitro, the whole. If you say just you heard that God did it, no, he didn't. He didn't hear that God put the Egyptian to the sea. He heard that Elohim did it. Midat Adin, that's influence. So we need to teach people how to read the Torah, how to pay attention to Elohim, to Yudah Vachkei, and be at that level. Not just to believe blindly, but to know. I think Steve said last time that the Judaism is teaching, learning, intellectual, because it's intellectual, you can know. Hashem doesn't ask you to believe in Him.
Right.
It's not enough. You need to know His name, to know why you are here, to know the Torah. And finally, if you ever reach the point that one day we will know Him like I know the table next door, oh, that's for the future. I don't know, but one day humanity reach that level, could be.
Yeah, Rabbi, that is the main, main. I hate to use the word revelation, but epiphany for people that come out of Christianity is everything was on an ethereal belief system, and when we began to realize that you could actually know God by His teaching, by the Torah, you understand His essence only through the Torah. You understand His characteristics only through the Torah and Jewish wisdom. Then when you realize you know God, you realize that belief alone or experiential events really don't have staying power. Only knowing has staying power. Something I'd like to say in a wrap up, Rabbi, is really, I really appreciate you bringing that up because it's a great confirmation. I do want to do this, and I thank the Rabbi for being able to be here in the discussions and providing such great commentary. It also gives me a chance to think while the commentary is going on. And one of the things that just really jumps out is this contrast. If we were to be given the Matan Torah without the story of Yitro here, we would perceive that this source of truth would be so high at such a level that man couldn't comprehend it. Once we experience the power of God's presence on Mount Sinai, and how could any human wisdom compare to it? And how could we ever innovate and tamper with the very words of Hashem? You would assume there's just no place in it. But yet Yitro tells us that some straight thinking has place in Torah. Some pure human intellect and logic has a place in Torah. Yitro's story teaches that not only Moses, the man of God who speaks panim hapanim, face to face with God, will be able to analyze and prescribe God's laws, that any honest, upstanding, pure-hearted, God-fearing individual would be able to take the words of Moses and disseminate them, logically process them. The atmosphere that the story of Yitro brings in is that the Torah is not so high and mighty that it cannot be brought down to the human experience and discussed and contrast and brought its powerful meaning through human intellect and logic. And that's why Torah has such a powerful effect on those of us who come from the nations. We realize the power of the wisdom of Torah put into the mind of man that God formed and created is the greatest bond of knowledge and raising up our higher conscience. And wow, it's just so inspiring. And you would think the story, we would come across it once again and go, oh, Yitro again, where's Ross? Right. And then all of a sudden we find this beautiful treasure trove. Anybody else have anything before we go?
Quick question.
Yes,
I've
Sandy.
heard you say the phrase a couple of times this morning. What is Matan Torah? I've never heard
the giving, the Matan Torah, giving of Torah. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for asking, Sandy. Who else? Great discussion, guys. Great class. Tonight is Devon Mays, and then Steve, God willing, we're going to have your situation figured out. This is the third week of saying it. But Steve, find a way for maybe you, me, and Sandy or somebody get together on Skype this afternoon, if you don't mind, or maybe tomorrow morning. Y'all tell me when's a good time. Okay, until then, Rabbi Avner, be well, and Shabbat Shalom for you if we don't see you again.
Yeah, thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.